So this would be APDC Psychology, Unit 4, Lecture 2, and also Psychology L, Unit 3, Lecture 2. This is the second lecture on memory. We've talked about last time. We talked kind of the process of memory, that memory is like a computer. You have to encode things, and then you have to store things and be able to retrieve things. And then we also mentioned that there's 3 levels of memory. The first being sensory memory, which we talked about in the excuse me, previous lecture. This is going to be about short-term memories, and then we'll get into long-term memories, and then we'll get into forgetting and all that fun stuff that goes with that. But majorly, we're going to take a little bit of a look at sensory memory, continuing, and then, of course, looking at short-term memory as well. So, again, the process is 2 billion bits of information coming at us every second. That's sensory memory. 2 billion bits of information lasts for a half a second. It's that immediate take a picture, take a picture, take a picture, take a picture, replace a picture sort of thing. That's your iconic memory, which is about half a second. And then your echoic memory, which is about 2 to 4 seconds, where we can sort of hear things. So again, 2 billion bits of information, but if I never take it in, if I never encode it, it becomes lost. Now, by encoding it, that means I'm paying attention to it. So out of those 2 billion bits of things, I decide what to pay attention to. For example, if somebody gives me a phone number and I go, okay, wait, what's that number? Hang on, and I put it in, and then I do the phone call. That number probably just goes away because there's no reason to remember it, because now it's in my phone. Why do I have to remember that? All right, so holds things for about 30 seconds, anything I need to pay attention to in that immediate moment. So this could be a number that I repeat to myself again and again and again until I put it away, or, you know, if I'm deciding to go down to the kitchen to get something to eat because I want Doritos, and as I walk down, I go Doritos, 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 so I don't get downstairs and go, what the hell did I come down here for? So I'm encoding it and sort of holding on to it. Now, if it's in short-term memory and it becomes important, then I need to encode it into long-term memory by rehearsing it, studying it, whatever. Then once it's there, I pull it out, put it back into short-term memory, and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. And this is how memories could, in fact, change because of that. So my short-term memory, my STM, is what is also known as my working memory. Okay, holds a few items, holds them briefly, very limited in its capacity. Capacity is about 7 to 9 items. For about 30 seconds. It's pretty much what you can read for a little bit. For example, if you were taking notes, and in taking notes, this screen that we have right here, all the words on this screen, what you're not going to do is read this entire PowerPoint, all these words, and then write it down on a piece of paper. What we're going to do is we're going to go short-term memory is working memory, activated memory that holds a few items briefly, limited in duration and capacity. Okay, short-term memory. Okay, it's what? Working memory. Working memory. Okay, is what? Activated memory that holds a few items briefly. Activated memory that, okay, let's go back. Holds a few items briefly. And we go back and forth and back and forth. And then as I'm going few items briefly, I may not remember short-term. Because each of these things gets replaced again and again. Once it goes in, then it's replaced by the next thing, then it's replaced by the next thing. Now, as these things come into my short-term memory, what I have to do is I have to use my little central executive that goes, where have I seen this information before? And it's better for digits than it is for letters. I can remember numbers better than random letters, because there's only 10 digits to choose from, and there's 26 letters to choose from. It's better for what we hear than what we see, and it's better if I'm hearing it and seeing it both as well. So again, looking up a phone number, putting it in, whatever. The effectiveness of your working memory is a pretty good predictor of your IQ. You know, your ability to do math inside your head. If I said a number to you, a 15-digit number to you, it'd be one thing to be able to repeat that number back to me, those 7, 8, 9, 15 digits. But would you be more impressed if you could repeat it? Okay, here's the number, say it backwards. Because now I'm putting it in my mind and I'm rearranging it and I'm bringing it out as something different. That's working memory, which again is a greater sign of intelligence than just being able to regurgitate something from long term. So again, this idea of a central executive. The central executive is everything that I know. Okay, so again, when I take a look at this and I take a look at these words, my central executive happens to know the English language. So when I see a word like everything, I know what that is. I can process it and everything else. Now, if this was in Spanish, my central executive doesn't speak Spanish. So therefore, this would be very difficult for me to read, process, or whatever. So the key is take what I'm experiencing and tie it with what I already know or what I'm familiar with. And that's going to make it a whole lot easier to process, digest, and do all these other things. Somebody who is much younger and has been working a lot on computers in their 20s is probably going through the whole Schoology, everything else through a much, much easier way than someone like me who, learned to do computers on an Apple IIe. It's just taken an extra second or two for me to process this because it's not as familiar with me being a traditional sort of a old school blackboard kind of guy. All right. So again, this could impact how you're taking the information in. It also leaves you blind to other stimuli. If your central executive has some sort of bias against particular things, your particular bias against particular things. If you're someone who's sexist and you don't believe that women can do the job that men could do, when a woman does a good job, you may not process it necessarily as a good job. You may process it as something else. You don't notice an insult because you don't think your boyfriend would ever say anything mean. When somebody else tells you he's treating you terrible, whatever, your central executive doesn't see it. So when he says something mean, it's, oh, he's just kidding, whatever, he wouldn't possibly be mean to me. So again, we process sort of what we want to know to be the truth, and our central executive sees that. And so what we pay attention to is largely interpreted, and it's largely set by this central executive. Now, for example, if you study this chessboard below, all right, study that chessboard, look at all the pieces, then I take the pieces away. And if I were to ask you the question, where is the white knight? Some of you may remember where the white knight is and everything else. But for some of you that have never played chess, you don't know what a white knight looks like. There's a lot of white pieces, but I don't know what the white knight looks like. Now I could tell you, well, it's the horsey. Okay, well, can I remember where the little horsey was? And it would have been easier if I looked at the board and we got him right over there. Or if I asked you where was the black queen? Well, do I know the difference that this is the queen versus that's being the king? The king has the cross and the queen is the crown. If I don't know this, if I don't have experience playing chess, it's going to be harder for me to process this. If I'm not a chess player, that's just a bunch of shapes on a red and black table. If I'm a chess player, I'm going, okay, well, this guy's doing the Bansari defense or something made up or whatever, then I'm going to process this a little bit differently. When you got somebody who is an athlete, who's played a lot of football in their lives, when they look at a defense, they see levels and zone and two-man and whatever. And if you're someone that doesn't really watch a lot of football, you just see 11 people colliding into each other. So again, our central executive, our experience is going to have a lot of huge impact on how we process this material. Okay. Now, this idea of multitasking, which we talked a little bit about with sensation and perception, for those of you that recovered that. We're not built for distractions. We cannot do multiple things at the same time, at least not well. Now, things like, well, I can talk on the phone and drive. Yeah, because neither of them take a lot of attention. Usually when we're driving home, we're driving to the store, we're making little trips that we've made hundreds, if not thousands of times. Usually when we're talking on the phone, it's not that deep of a conversation. Yeah, yeah, well, whatever you want. And it's not really that deep. So since none of these takes a lot of processing, it's easy to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now, if I was driving, if you've ever been in the car with your parents and the weather comes in or your dad's lost or whatever, he's like, would you be quiet back there? Because now he needs to focus on driving. Or if I'm in a phone conversation and suddenly it gets really, really intense, I'm going to have to pull over to the side so that I can focus on that conversation. When we try to do more than one thing at a time, what happens is we're dividing up our attention, so we're not doing it as well as if we had just focused on one particular thing. Lloyd Margaret Peterson tried to do a little test with this where they had people multitask, and they really just gave them a random three consonant group like CHJ. It wasn't initials or anything else like that, just random three consonants. And then they said, here's your three consonants. Got them? Go. So it's L, R, Q, or whatever. And then what they had to do is they had to count from 100 backwards as fast as they could. 199, 98, 97, 96, 95, 94, 93, 92, 91, 98. Yeah. And then they go, okay, stop. And after 3 seconds, which you count a lot of numbers, you know, it's not just 3 numbers, as many numbers as you could count backwards in 3 seconds. They go, stop. What were those 3 letters again? And they go, I don't know. But if they did know, then they would have to start counting again. So could I keep track in my working memory? Could I keep track of those letters over here while at the same time working the numbers over here? And what they discovered was, first off, 10% of the people forgot the letters before they even started counting. Then what they discovered was about 40% of the people forgot it after 3 seconds. And then it got down to here that 70% of the people would forget it after 6 seconds. And then we get down to 20% after 9, and on down, on down, all down. This ability to multitask is a very, very, very rare thing, because I can only keep so many things in my short-term memory at a time. And if I'm counting backwards as fast as I can to hold on to that CHJ or RLQ or whatever it happened to have been, to hold on to that while counting backwards, very difficult for us to do. All right, so other stuff there on working memory, if you want to take a look at that, or if you want to take a look at that as well. Again, the capacity is very limited. Now, the impact of our memory has a lot to do with how did I process the information. As I'm paying attention to stuff and putting it in my short-term memory, can I get it over to long-term memory? Well, a lot of that depends on how am I processing the material. Okay, for example, things that are shallowly processed, which means I'm not really paying attention. I'm not really connecting it to something I know with my central executive or previous learning or whatever. This tends to be forgotten pretty quickly. When I'm cramming for a test and just looking at my outline going, none of that's getting processed into the brain. You know, this is why we remember stories better than simple repetition. This is why I tell you guys as often as I can, I'll tell you stories. I'll tell you stories about my family. I'll tell you stories about myself, my children, whatever, because that's going to make it easier for you to remember. Or if you could take something we're talking about in psychology or any of your other classes, and you can go, oh, that's like the time when I did this. Now we pull out the memory of when I did this and we add that folder to it. It becomes easier to remember. But a lot of times when I'm just reading and blah, 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 trying to read a book and cram information in there, and I'm shallowly processing it, my memory's not going to be that great. That's why what I want to do is I want to deeply process things, semantically, place it with something we already know. Like I said before, with music and folders, you know, where have I heard this before? What is this like that I know? You know, even if I'm hearing a new singer that I've never heard before now. Oh, that sounds like so-and-so, and I got a lot of files on so-and-so, so I can put it like that. First time I heard, what's his name, Ed Sheeran, the guy from England, I go, that's a lot like Elton John. He's got a kind of an Elton John vibe to him. And I have a huge file on Elton John, so it was easy to put a couple of Ed Sheeran songs in there, or with John Mayer because it was acoustic guitar. And I got a lot of John Mayer files. So again, I put it in, again, with John Mayer. I've been to a couple of concerts with my wife, so now I'm tying it to concert with my wife, going out, and all my wife's experiences and her favorite songs, and all these other things. The more things that I can tie it to, the more likely I am to remember it. Okay, because again, one memory is a needle in a haystack. If I just have this one memory in this one file and I don't process it with anything else. Now, if I start putting it into all these other folders, now suddenly I've got 100 needles in a haystack, and it's going to be a little easier to find that in that one needle. So I want to deeply process it as much as I can. Other strategies that we would use, chunking, put things together in a way that makes sense. That's familiar. If I try to remember these 12 digits, a 1, a 7, a 7, a 6, a 1, a 4, a 9, and a 2, and a 1, and an 8, and a 1, and a 2, and a 1, and a 9, and a 4, and a 1. Well, that's just 16 random digits. Am I going to be able to remember those? Or if I chunk them into 1776, 1492, 1812, 1941, that suddenly becomes a little bit easier, because then I can just remember Declaration. Already got a file on the Declaration of Independence. Already have a file on Columbus discovering America. Already have a file on the War of 1812. And already have a file that 1941 was Pearl Harbor. So now I just take all of these 16 digits, put them in little groups, and then put them with something I already know to be true. When we remember phone numbers, we remember the prefix, or I'm sorry, remember the zip code and the prefix and the last four numbers. It's not these 10 individual numbers. Sometimes we'll make acronyms. We'll take the first letter of something. Those of you in music, every good boy does fine. Very familiar with you. Trying to remember the Great Lakes, Huron, Ontario, Michigan, Erie, Superior is home. Roy G. Biv, Color of the Rainbow. You know, we'll take things and sort of put them in order. When I make a grocery list, I like to put all the produce together, all the dairy together, all the meats together, all the breads together, all the canned goods together, because that's going to make it easier for me to remember sort of what I'm going to the store for. So chunky is a good effortful processing strategy. Another good effortful processing strategy that will help us remember things is to visualize it, imagine it. See yourself there, which is why nouns are easier to remember than verbs, because a noun I could picture. New York City. Oh, someone needs to talk to me about New York City. Well, I like the Yankees. I've got kids that live in New York, and let's go back to trips that I've made to New York and times in Central Park with my wife, where I've been very happy. My time where I spent at the 9/11 Museum and all these. So I got all these folders on New York, so I can imagine New York. If you're talking about New York and you're telling me a story about New York, I can imagine being there. I can imagine being on the street, stopping at a hot dog stand or whatever else, or movies that I've seen about New York and all these other things. So if I can imagine it, I can put myself there, it's much more likely that I'm going to remember it. So any sort of imagery is a very powerful aid to remember in this semantic encoding, especially with facts and everything else. But also know that when we use imagery, a lot of that has to do with our mood and our predisposition. Again, we remember the good times is better than what they were, and the bad times is worse than what they were. And the reason that we do that is because we need to justify that I labeled it as a good time, or I got to justify that I labeled it as a terrible time. So again, each time I go back to that memory, it's very possible that I'm processing it a little bit differently. Mnemonic devices. Mnemonic devices are this idea of a pithy little saying that sort of makes you remember something. When I was a principal, I was writing a card to somebody or something. It was a birthday card or something. And as I'm writing this card, I'm 36, 37 years of age. As I'm writing this card, I got stuck because you're writing, it's a pin. You don't want to cross out and look like an idiot. So as I'm writing this, I sort of stopped. I looked up, and one of my English teachers happened to be in my office, and I kind of looked at her sort of, humbly. And I asked her, I go, how do you spell the word friend? How do you spell friend? Is it E-I or is it I-E? And she just looked at me, kind of smiled, and she goes, your friends to the end. Your friends to the end. So it ends in end. Thank you. And ever since that particular moment, I have always remembered that little thing. So sometimes we have just a little bit of a trick that just sort of pops things open. When I was trying to figure out, 7 times 8 or 8 times 7 used to always confuse me when I was a little kid on the multiplication tables, until I went 7 times 8, 7, 8, 5, 6, 56, 5, 6, 7, 8. 5 and 6 come before 7 and 8. Oh, and it makes it easier because you have this nice little way that you remember. A hierarchy is another way to do things. For those of you guys working on this outline is a hierarchy. You've got, here's what the lecture is. There's Roman numeral 1, and then capital A goes under this. So everything here that's indented goes with the 1. Everything below it, you go with this regular one goes with that A. These little letters go with what's up there. And you sort of put things in order. When we take a look at types of long-term memory, declarative memories, which are conscious recall, versus non-declarative memories, implicit memories, where we're not consciously recalling it. So things that we do or moods that we have versus thoughts that I have and episodes that have happened in my life and things that I know. And I put these in these hierarchies to sort of organize them in my mind a little bit. And again, there's another example of a hierarchy. Again, when it comes to memory, I love me some me. If I can make it about myself, I am so much more likely to remember it. When we say something, we remember it at a rate of 70%. The reason why I encourage you to write your notes, because as you hear and as you see the things on the board, and as you hear and as you move your hand, that physical movement of the hand, writing things, you process it much better than typing, because typing is kind of a, whether you're hitting a J or a K or an L or an S, they're all sort of the same movement, versus making the J, making the A, making the word, where your hand sort of involved in that, spelling out each letter. It actually helps your memory more, writing things out versus typing things out or texting them or whatever else the case may be. Again, if I make it about me and the more ways that I process it, something I just read, I'm going to remember 10% of the time. If I hear it, 20% of the time. If I see it, about 30% of the time. If I see it and hear it, well, let's add those two together, it's going to be 50% of the time. Then if I talk about it, it's going to be 70% of the time. And if I do all these things and say and do, it's going to get up to 90% of the time. So the more ways that I process, the more ways that I take in the information, I read the book and then see the movie, all the more experiences I have with it, and the more that I can make it about myself, which is why, certain movies, certain characters, certain songs that we can identify with. Oh, that's my song. That's all about me. That we're going to remember those lyrics much more versus a song that we can't really connect with. Distributed practice, spacing it out to review over a period of time. If I meet somebody once a month over a 4-month period, I'm far more likely to remember that person than a person I meet 4 times in 1 month. Because I make the memory, I put it away, and then I go back to the memory, I pull it out, then I put it away, and then I pull it out, and then I put it away. If I distribute this practice, and that's why if you study the night before a test, you're not going to do as well as if you continue to study throughout. And I know it's really hard to have time to do that and everything else. So the greater the distance between rehearsal. Barak did a study in 1993 that over 9 years, foreign language was studied at intervals ranging from 14 to 56 days. And the longer the interval was in between, the longer of a rest that you had, and you sort of had to wipe off the dust and do it all over again, you had greater retention. You guys that are taking this class in the fall have an advantage because you're going to get all the material, and then you got to dust it off in the spring, assuming that you do. Versus the people in the spring, you're going to be learning this material right before the test. So not as much time to process that. The testing effect, you put yourself in a game situation, put yourself in a scrimmage where the coach goes, okay, let's put the ball on the 20-yard line. Let's put 2.5 minutes on the clock. Let's say we're down by 4, go run the offense. So you do that in practice. So when you're in the game and you're down by 7 and there's 3:52 on the clock, you're sort of like, I feel like I've been here before. And there's some familiarity with that, brings confidence and everything else. That's why I tell you to do practice tests. If you can, because it's one thing to study your vocabulary. Here's what short-term memory means, but can you actually answer questions about short-term memory? Because that's what the test is going to ask you to do. So taking a practice test rather than just looking over the vocabulary. Doing a dress rehearsal. If you're in a play, I need, I could sit there and memorize my lines, but it's another thing if I wear this costume and I'm under these lights and that person is saying the words to me dressed in the costume that they're going to be wearing, so that when I finally do get on the stage and an audience is there, it feels familiar. And it's easier to go to that memory that I created of the other times that I've been rehearsing. So testing yourself is going to help it out. So again, what we have here is the stimulus comes in, the sensory memory, 2 billion bits of information every second. Then we encode it into short-term memory. And depending on how we rehearse this, process it, whatever, it's going to have a huge impact in encoding it and putting it into long-term memory so that we can go back and get it later. Because long-term memory is your relatively permanent storehouse of memory. After it's been in my short-term memory for 30 seconds and I process it, I want to put it away into long-term memory. And a lot of times it's not that we lose a memory. It's not that we forget something. We just don't know where we placed that memory at. We know that we have it. It's somewhere in there, but I didn't connect it to enough files or whatever else the case may be. Sometimes new memories can get in the way of finding old memories. If somebody was very sweet and you were in a relationship with them and everything was fantastic and you have all these lovely memories of them, and then suddenly you found out that they cheated on you or they lied to you, and now you're starting to go, well, what else did they lie about? When else did they cheat on me? So all those past memories, we start to change them a little bit. So the old new memories are going to get in the way of the old memories, or how we think about those old memories. And again, when it comes to memories, they don't reside in a certain part of your brain. It's not like not eugenics. It's not like why can I not think phrenology? It's not like the guy with the things all over his head. Then this is where my childhood memories are. They're everywhere because again, I've got these files everywhere, and the more that I can make neural connections with different files, the more likely I'm going to be able to remember something, recall something, and go back and get it. So again, Carl Lashley did a study in 1950 about where these memories are located at. So what he did was he took a bunch of rats and he would have these rats run in this maze. And then what he did is after the rat learned the maze, he would go into their brain, do a little surgery on them, and just basically slice out a little part of their brain. And he would slice out different parts of the brain, trying to discover which part of the brain do I need to take away? Where's the memory of running this maze? And what he discovered was no matter which part he removed, they still generally had a pretty good idea of how to run the maze because each maze was the maze was all in different parts of their brain, whether, you know, how the cerebellum and how they're walking, or the temporal with what they're hearing, or the occipital with what they're seeing, or whatever else. It's all over the place. The motor cortex telling their feet to move, the sensory cortex, what they smelled. Those memories were located all over their brain. So he noticed a correlation. The more of the brain that was removed, the harder the time they had. But there was no specific part that this is the maze part of your brain. Okay. And this basically proved that memories aren't stored in a specific place. We make connections and we put these connections all over the brain because if I can't get to one particular thing, maybe I'll find it somewhere else. But at the same time, if you have an injury to your brain, as we talked about before, I have a stroke or whatever, which destroys part of those memories, that's where sometimes I have to do physical or mental therapy, speech therapy or whatever to sort of make those reconnections where those things were destroyed. All right. Now, when it comes to long-term memory, we've got a couple of different long-term memories. We've got declarative memories, and declarative memories are things that I know. I declare. I know what the capital of Texas is. It's Austin. You know, these are facts that I know, and you can ask me, and I can bring them out and regurgitate it for you. Also, falling under declarative memories are episodes that have happened to us, events in our lives. Okay, so episodic memories, semantic, they both fall under declarative memory. Now, what's very, very important when it comes to declarative memories is a little guy called the hippocampus, which we talked about for those of us who went through the biology portion. We talked about the hippocampus right there. The hippocampus is basically the save button of your memory. If you don't push save, it goes away. For example, I'm on my computer right now. I'm making this little video, and if my computer suddenly goes away, I lose this video because it's never been saved. If we don't hit the save button, it's like that thing never happened. Again, I repeat the phone number in my head, and I just put it in the phone. I don't hit the save button, it goes away. I don't rehearse it, tie it to something I already know, or anything else like that. So the hippocampus is this little guy right here that basically is the save button to memory. So it's in the short-term memory. Then this guy decides where to shoot it and where to connect it with other parts of our brain. If I don't hit the save button, I'm never going to see it. Okay. So again, this is not where memories are stored. It's where new memories are sort of created and then pushed out and stored all over our brain. Damage to the hippocampus means that you're going to have trouble making new memories, such as this gentleman by the name of Clive Waring, which we should be watching a video in class about him as long as we've got time. Clive Waring, back in the 80s, developed encephalitis, if I'm not mistaken. And as part of his encephalitis, it destroyed his hippocampus. And by destroying his hippocampus, he's no longer able to make new episodic memories. And he's no longer able to learn new semantic facts. So his learning is sort of done. Where he was at 35, he's still at this age of his life. His implicit memories are still there. He still has the ability to dress himself. He still has the ability to eat. His language is fine, all those things. But he cannot remember episodes. And what he would do is he would go into his notebook and he would just write down what he was thinking at that particular moment. And then when he would look back at his notebook, he had no idea how those words got there, which could be very, very frustrating for him when you see that. But kind of the sweet part about it, if you see the video, is his wife, Deborah, who still is with him. If she leaves the room and comes back in 5 minutes, to him, it's like he hasn't seen her in 30 years. It's a very, very sort of sweet love story between the two of them, but he just can't get any new information there. He can still play the piano. You put music in front of him, he can still, because when you're playing the piano, in that particular moment, I'm reading those particular notes and I don't have to remember what I was playing 30 seconds ago. But the guy is always in his short-term memory, doesn't know what happened before. Now, when it comes to memory, the frontal lobe has some importance to this as well, because again, the frontal lobe is our ability to think hypothetically, moral reasoning, sense of identity, and all these other things. And if we have damage to the hippocampus, it has trouble sending these memories to the frontal lobe. When I've had this experience before, when I've reasoned this way before, or whatever else the case may be. The left side of the brain, as we learned for those of us who went through the biology part, the left side is the more logical part of our brain. So any damage to the left side in the Wernicke and the Broca area is going to have a big, big impact on our ability to make language. And any damage to the right side of the brain is going to be a little bit more for visuals and emotions. Now, again, men tend to be a little bit more left brain than women, which is why guys tend to be a little bit more logical, give me just the facts and everything else, whereas women tend to be a little bit more right brain, so they're a little bit more connected with their emotions and whatnot. Not always the case, but in general is the case. So a lot of times it's not technically forgetting if the memory was never made. We never hit our hippocampus. If we never put something in it, we really didn't forget it. It's just that we never encoded it. We never put it together and put it in its proper place. So this is why sometimes we have to do something which is called effortful processing. As we said before, now again, effortful processing is consciously attempting to remember. As we talked about before, making these connections, putting it in a folder that I've already made before. Facts and experiences, we can consciously recognize stuff we know, these declarative memories. And remember again, a declarative memory, I declare this happened to me. Facts, names, faces, trivia, semantic memories, these are facts that happen to me. So it's based on our ability to recall these things through repetition, studying, whatever. Now, again, because of our central executive, we're going to be more likely to remember things that are a little bit more personal or about me. This is also why, and we'll talk about this in class, we tend to recognize, differences amongst our own race more than we notice differences amongst people of other races, because we're used to, I'm used to looking at my own face and my own family and everything else. So I can see subtle differences between white people much easier than I can see amongst Hispanic or Asian or Black people, because that's what I've been more exposed to. And this is why I'm sure most of us have had the experience of being mistaken for someone else by another race. Oh, well, you look exactly like so-and-so. Why? Because we're both Hispanic, because we're both men, because we're both whatever. We tend to notice differences amongst our own race more than others. Now, again, when it comes to declarative memories, it's easier if we make a connection to them. If I ask you to just remember these words, bird, costume, mailbox, head, river, nurse, theater, wax, eyelid, furnace, it's a bunch of random words. But if you suddenly put a story together and you start to visualize it, a man dressed in a bird costume and wearing a mailbox on his head, all right, immediately I'm interested. The bird costume, enough, but how does the mailbox go with that? And what is it doing on your head? Well, there's already 3 words I visualized. And then he's seen leaping into a river. Well, what's that going to do to the bird costume and all the feathers? So now I got a guy, mailbox, bird costume on his head. Mailbox is on the head and he's jumping into a river. Then a nurse ran out of a nearby theater. Well, what the hell was she watching? And she applied wax on his eyelids. Well, was that on the other side of the bird costume? He died and was tossed into a furnace. Now that seems a little bit extreme. But now suddenly I look at these words, bird, costume, mailbox, head, river, nurse, theater, wax, eyelid, furnace, and this imagery that we came up with makes it easier to remember. So again, when we take words and we make a narrative out of them, we're far more likely to recall them than if we're just asked to memorize a list of words. So again, can I make it make sense semantically? Tie it with something I already know, or episodically. An episodic memory are events that happen to us. Now, again, you could have 2 people that experience the exact same event, but they have different memories of it because they encoded it a little bit different. The levels of stress that we're going through, that's going to encode it one way or another. The mood that we happen to be in. How important is it to me?
You know, a lot of times we get upset with our parents because we asked our parents for something and they didn't remember. Well, that's because it was really important to you because it's the one thing that you asked for, but they got like four or five, six kids, and it's harder for them to remember those particular things. You know, your teacher doesn't remember your name, which is very distressing because you're just like, you've been my teacher for 4 months. How can you not remember my name? Well, because you haven't talked a lot in class and things like that. They haven't made a lot of connections. Whereas a teacher has to learn 180 different names, you got to learn 6. You know, and I'll still have students in the middle of the year not know what my name is, calling me Mr. Vance. I have hair. Each time you recall a memory, it becomes a little bit tainted, as we talked about before. It's like a toy from a factory. You take it out of the box, and that's not the way it was originally coming from the factory. It's open to suggestibility, the idea that other people can sort of implant things into your memory. The fact that we would make terrible eyewitnesses because we want to be right, we want to be correct. But in this idea of being right and correct, sometimes it makes us wrong and we're not good witnesses. Another type of, and usually when we think of declarative memory, we think retrospective. We think these are things that happened in our past. But there's also this idea of a prospective memory, remembering things that haven't happened yet. And again, I'm not talking about ESP or anything else like that, but I'm just talking about remembering plans that you're making for the future. You know, remembering that you have a test next week, making plans for homecoming or prom, picking up something from the store on your way home that your parents asked you for. So you're remembering your parents asked you for something, but it's also something you have to do in the future. So it's prospective. It's something in the future. You know, if you think of a gold digger prospecting, they're going and looking for gold and trying to do those particular things. And again, this is largely focused in the frontal lobe of the brain, all right, an area where teens tend to struggle with. This is why when your parents ask you to do things, you're like, I forgot you asked me to do that, because a lot of these prospective memory in the frontal lobe, which is the last part of your brain to develop, which is why sometimes you flake, you forgot a test, you forgot you were supposed to meet someone somewhere or whatever else. You forgot you were supposed to go to work, all these things. Teens are more likely to forget responsibilities because the prospective memory is in the frontal lobe, and the frontal lobe is the last part of your brain to develop. And again, like with other memories, our dependence on the smartphone may leave this underdeveloped. I don't have to remember my schedule because I just put it in here and it reminds me. So I'm never exercising that. I'm never making the neural connections because I have my little dependency on my phone. So I set a reminder, I set an alarm. Well, that's all great, but could I do it without the phone? You know, could I just sort of, you know, tie the string around the finger or whatever else the case may be? All right, so that gives you sort of a general idea about declarative memories and long-term memory, etc. I think the next lecture we'll talk a little bit more about long-term memory, and we'll take a little bit of a look at retrieval as well. And that should wrap us up with this lecture.